going to drastically change the future of how we do some of our work, potentially one way or the other. I'm assuming everybody on this call doesn't need to be told to make a plan to vote, but just in case, make a plan to vote if you haven't already. Obviously, we have a very important election coming up. So I'll touch on that a little bit at the end, but I'm going to start by just going over where we are on some of our biggest issues right now under the current administration. And I'll stop and I'll try to go slow, which is not a talent of mine. And I welcome questions as we go through the issues. So just starting with the Arctic refuge. So I put this slide up. This is actually a slide that we used to use a lot in the past, and we haven't used it in a while. And even though it's kind of boring and has a lot of words on it, it's quite an inspirational slide once you understand what it is. We put this together when the Trump administration first started working on the lease sale plan to drill in the refuge. And as you can see at the top, this is all in 2019. As you know, you all probably commented when they were doing the EIS process for leasing. They did that really quickly, mostly in 2019. There were a number of comment periods. We engaged, very deeply in that process to make sure that the administration knew how widely opposed this proposal to drill was. And as you can see with that big flashing star bubble that says lease sale, we were expecting them to hold the lease sale in summer of last year. And so, over the course of 2019, things got slowed down periodically, but we basically got to the fall of 2019, around when we passed the bill that would have, on the House floor, we passed the bill that would repeal what happened in the Tax Act. That was a huge congressional victory for us to sort of set the stage for passing a bill to overturn the oil and gas program in the future when we had a better Congress. And right around that same time, the administration released its draft EIS, our final EIS for drilling. And that was the timing we were expecting. If you know the NEPA process, you have a draft environmental impact statement, then you have a final environmental impact statement, and then after the final, you wait 30 days, and usually after 30 days, you get a record of decision, which is the final phase in the EIS process. So last September, we got the final EIS. It was just as terrible as we expected. The entire coastal plain was proposed to be open for development. And we were bracing ourselves for this record of decision to come shortly there at 30 days thereafter, which also would be a trigger for them to start a lease sale process. And basically since that time, we waited and waited and waited, and nothing came. There's different speculation on why the administration all of a sudden slowed down. We don't know for sure. They were losing a lot of lawsuits, so it's possible that they wanted to make sure that they had a plan that wasn't, they know that it was going to be litigated, but they wanted to have a plan that was going to be withstand litigation. They were having a lot of trouble with getting the information they needed to say that they wouldn't be able to harm polar bears, which is a species that is threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And then all of that was happening. And then, as we all know, the pandemic happened, and then the oil market crashed. And there was speculation that they didn't think if they held a lease sale, they didn't know if they would get bidders. If they did get bidders, it would go for incredibly low prices, and it would look really like we have said it would for a long time, and it would look incredibly embarrassing. So all of that was happening all through the beginning of 2020, and we've been waiting. They did finally release the record of decision, which is that final part of the lease sale process in September. We had thought what would happen when they released that record of decision, they would immediately start a separate process that they had to do to hold a lease sale, but that didn't happen. So what them releasing the record of decision did was that was a trigger for us to litigate on the EIS, and we filed a lawsuit against the process that they went through with the environmental impact statement. Another set of environmental groups entered a lawsuit on the EIS. A set of tribes entered a lawsuit on the EIS, and then 15 state attorney generals, state attorney generals from 15 different states entered a lawsuit on the EIS. So all of that was triggered and happened as soon as they released that record of decision. And that is sort of actively in the courts right now. In the meantime, we're still waiting. In order for the administration to be able to go forward with the lease sale, they have to initiate a lease sale process. There's a couple steps to that. There's a call for nominations in which they ask companies to tell them where they want to bid. They have to notice the lease sale, which is basically just announce that they're having a lease sale. And once they notice a lease sale, they have to wait 30 days in order to hold the lease sale. Once they hold the lease sale, if any company bids, if there actually were bidders on the coastal plain, then they have to go through a process of, there's like a paperwork process that they have to go to in order to grant the leases over to the company. And that's even another couple weeks beyond that. So there are a number of steps the administration still has to go to in order to hold a lease sale on the coastal plain. And because some of those steps have legally required timelines to them, they're getting dangerously close to not being able to hold a viable lease sale if there were to be a switch in the administration. So going back to this chart, you can see like we were expecting that we would have had a lease sale like by this time last year. It didn't happen. We can't know for sure why it didn't happen. We can speculate in all sorts of different spaces, but it's really, really good news that we are where we are today with the lease sale in the Arctic Refuge. I'll talk a little like later when we get to the end of the presentation about prospects in different administrations. Yeah, and I went over this when I was talking, but the thing that we have going right now is that we have litigation going on the EIS. We feel incredibly confident that the process they went through in putting together the environmental impact statement was incredibly deficient in the way they analyzed impacts to wildlife, impacts for water, and on the ground impacts in dealing with water, in dealing with permafrost, in consultation with the tribes. We have a number of claims that we think are very strong, as well as the other lawsuits that are out there. We don't know how fast that litigation will go, but we hope that they will, at the very least, require that EIS be done over, and it's possible that they could vacate the EIS altogether, just depending on where the court goes with it. So that's where we stand right now. It's a lot of waiting, but we are in as good a place as we could be given how under threat the refuge was, and especially looking back to where we thought we'd be at the beginning of 2019. So I'm going to pause there before I move on to other issues to see if there's any questions.
Okay, so do you want us to try raising hands or just asking?
Lois, you're muted.
So
yeah, you can just ask Amelia. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I got an interruption in the background, unfortunately, while Kristen was talking in the middle, but the gist of it was that there's still a process going forward, so they can't yet sell leases because there's still the notice, the 30 days wait, the actual sale, more paper on it, et cetera, et cetera. But once it's actually sold, assuming that we get to that point, once a sale has been taken place, then can another administration back that out?
Yeah, it's difficult, but there are pathways. So that would definitely be something that we're looking at if there is a transition in the administration. It's happened in the past. There's been offshore leases, both in Alaska and in the lower 48, that have been bought out, and it's happened in different ways. So there is a pathway. It is difficult because once a company owns it, they have the private rights to that, and then you're getting into their contractual rights to own those leases. And so we have to figure out the compensation and all of that, but there is a pathway that we are working on and will definitely pursue aggressively.
If you need to. And the other, if I could, with a question that's hopefully an improvement on that scenario, is if you strung together all of the things that you mentioned, the notice, the wait, the paper, the et cetera, could a sale actually be completed before a January transition?
As of today, they could probably do it. And I mean, there's also, sorry, I can't stop stop that from ringing. There is the way things should be done, and the way things should be done would make it really difficult for them to hold the lease sale, and especially every day that goes by. But we also know that this administration has a way of jamming things through in a way that hasn't been done in the past. So for instance, they're supposed to do a call for nominations, which is, of course they're going to leave a message, which is a process, in which they ask the companies where they want to bid, and there's a comment period associated with that. They could just skip that part of it, and I don't, and that's not normal business, and that's not the way things are normally done. But this administration is kind of like anybody's guess the way they'll handle it. So there's not a completely definitive answer to your question, but we're definitely getting, as of today, they probably could get it done, but every day that goes by gets harder and harder for them.
Great. That's a good thing, I think. Thank you. I
Yes,
appreciate that.
it's a very good thing.
And in the chat, we have a question: how does NEPA work in this situation? I believe the NEPA process is complete. Is that correct with the record of decision? Yeah, so there's no more NEPA to follow, but now it's in the courts and now it's in the administration's process that they have to do for the lease sale. But we do have another question here: is do we know who the prospective bidders might be based on corporate or other filings?
We have not, we've tried to figure that out. Chevron was the only oil company, like major oil company, that submitted comments during the EIS process, like company specific comments. The American Petroleum Institute submitted comments, but that's a little bit more expected. For those that understand a little bit about the way Alaska tribe, or Alaska Indigenous interests are organized. Tribes are organized into corporations in Alaska. I'm sorry, not tribes. Indigenous rights were organized into corporations when Alaska was first becoming a state. And so there are regional tribal corporations, and the one for the North Slope is the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. It's not a tribe, but it is possible that they would bid because they have such a parochial interest in the area. But for the major oil companies, we just don't know. It certainly doesn't seem lucrative. As many people know, there's been a number of banks, including every major US bank except for Bank of America, has said that they won't invest in drilling in the Arctic. So there's all kinds of disincentives for companies to do this. And we haven't seen any companies proactively say that they're interested in bidding. But it's really hard to know, because once you get outside of the majors, there's smaller companies that can go in and buy bids and kind of like in the hopes that they can hold on to them and sell them later. So it's a little bit hard to predict.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Is that enough questions for this? We can move on to the next place or campaign.
Yep. Pebble Mine, I put this next because it's another one that we can put in the good news category. I think everybody probably knows that Pebble Mine is just a massive copper, gold, and molybdenum, I don't know how to say that last mineral, mine that's been proposed in Alaska for decades. As proposed, it would be one of the biggest mines in the world. It's right at the headwaters of rivers that go into Bristol Bay, that it just has this incredible world-class salmon fishery. All the tribes in the regions are against this mine. Most of Alaskans are against this mine. There's so much bad about this thing. I'm sure you've all heard about it. I'm sure you've been engaged in advocacy against it. You'll see my very mediocre slideshow skills here on this slide. It has a lot of information on it, but I'll walk through it. So in the good news department, most of it is political for Pebble Mine, and it's just been fascinating over the last few months for those who haven't been following it. In the upper right-hand corner is sort of what happened first. And so I know a lot of the groups on the grounds were doing work in this space, but one day during September, Donald Trump Jr. All of a sudden tweeted in opposition to the mine. And once he did that, Fox News started doing reports on the mine, and all of a sudden, all of these conservative voices were speaking out about problems and their opposition to the mine. Around that time, President Trump sort of like sent a tweet out that was like, oh, we're going to look at both sides of the mine, kind of backtracking. what had been happening up until now is the Trump administration had been very aggressively pursuing the mine, and the Army Corps of Engineers was in the process of another EIS process in which they were going to approve the mine. And so then this sort of like weird political storm happened with all these conservatives speaking out against the mine. That all happened. Right when that was happening, the Army Corps of Engineers all of a sudden just really quickly changed course, and they said that Pebble Mine had to prove that there wasn't going to be any damage from the mine before they would finalize the process for the EIS. So they released a final, said the mine should go forward, and then after that, they kind of did a 360 or 180, and they said, actually, Pebble Mine Limited, you have to prove that there won't be, you have to like show the like plan to show that there won't be damage from the mine, which everybody was like, well, there is no plan to make sure there's not going to be damage from the mine. It's impossible. This mine is going to be incredibly damaging for the environment. So that's where the process stands. Then in the political realm, another thing happened during this period of time that you might have heard about, which was Tom Collier, who is the president of Pebble Mine, sort of got duped by this environmental group and thought he was on a phone conference with investors from China and said all of this inappropriate stuff about the Alaska delegation and how he had the Alaska delegation in his pocket and how this mine would be operating for hundreds of years, even though they only put it in a proposal for 20 years. And the Alaska delegation, they might say some stuff here and there, but they weren't going to do anything real that's going to stand in the way of the mine, and just like the worst of what he could say. So those tapes got released, and that just led to a storm. And you can kind of see like the headlines that I put at the bottom. First, he immediately had to resign, and then it forced both. And I mean, the funny thing about it, if you consider it funny, is everything he was saying was true. That's exactly what the Alaska delegation was doing, is they were saying as little as they could while not doing anything real to stop the mine, and it forced them both into a box. And now both Sullivan, who's in a very tight re-election campaign, and Murkowski have come out against the mine, and Murkowski is being incredibly active, talking about, taking action to make sure that she stops the mine. So that's where we are today. It's in a pretty good place. The record of decision from the Army Corps of Engineers is still outstanding, and the Army Corps hasn't said anything about whether they will or won't go forward with that. As far as having a lot of balls in your court, I think the idea that Pebble will move forward before the end of the year seems really unlikely. And then obviously, if there's not a transition in administration, it's probably a big question mark. And if there is a transition in administration, Pebble Mine is in a pretty good place.
Good.
So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions about that craziness.
Thank you. I guess we can go on.
Okay. And so, another issue that's really moving right now, it's incredibly important to us, is the Tongass National Forest. Again, I mean, I know this, most of you have been on a lot of these calls, so I'm sure you know that there's been a longstanding attempt by the Trump administration to exempt the Tongass from the roadless rule. And so we've been going through another EIS process. NEPA, in case you were wondering how important NEPA is for our issues, is incredibly important. And so we've been going through this EIS for this rule that would exempt the Tongass from the roadless rule and open a significant amount of old growth and untouched areas of the Tongass to new logging. On this slide is just a quick summary of how much opposition has we've been advocating and come forth during the comment period. When they got the comments, they got 140,000 unique comments. When you're talking about unique comments, that's a lot. And they're all like 90+% in opposition. There's been hundreds of fishermen that have weighed in, and then many, many tribes. I think there was a set of something like 7 or 8 tribes that actually sent a petition in asking for their own rulemaking on the Tongass because they were so opposed to what was happening with the roadless rule. And so the opposition nationally, the opposition is very strong, but within Alaska, the opposition is also very strong. And so, again, a lot of what is going to happen in the Tongass depends on what's going to happen in the next election. If there is a transition in administration, This information that you're seeing on the screen is going to set the stage for Biden administration to take quick and early action to reverse everything that's happened around the roadless rule. And at the same time that the roadless rule fight has been happening, the administration has also been trying to move these giant logging programs forward in areas that aren't protected by the roadless rule. And so this, in the Tongass, this is an example of how important and how successful litigation can be. There's been two major lawsuits that have happened based on Trump administration action in the Tongass. One was on an island called QU, and the administration was trying to move forward a timber sale based on another EIS that had, and so they were putting out timber sales in 2017 and 2018 based on an EIS that they had developed in 2007 that they didn't update. And so that was the crux of the lawsuit. But what was even more infuriating about the situation is they weren't even getting bidders on these timber sales. Nobody was bidding. This is incredibly unsustainable logging. And if you're not essentially heavily subsidizing the industry, in a lot of cases, it's not economical. And so they tried to hold a timber sale. They didn't get any bidders. And then they kind of like put some feelers out to hold another one, realized they weren't going to get any bidders again. And then we kind of ended up going into settlement negotiations with the Forest Service, and they dropped the entirety of the plan. And our attorneys, who are great, were able to push. And they basically, the Forest Service had to agree that they got rid of that 2007 EIS that they were trying to hold on to and use for future action. They just had to scrap that completely. And they had to give us any notice if they're going to try to hold a lease sale again so that we could prepare and, in advance. And so that was a pretty definitive win that completely got rid of the effort on QU. And similarly, you might have heard about the timber sales that they were pursuing on Prince of Wales Island. This started, I think, around 2019 or so, that they proposed what would have been the biggest old growth timber sale in 30 years, just out of the blue on Prince of Wales. They were trying to use an EIS process in which they weren't really analyzing the on the ground impacts. They were kind of trying to push that down the road. And the court found pretty easily in our favor because what the Forest Service was doing was so egregious. And actually, just last week, we had already won in a settlement, a summary judgment. And just last week, we found out that the Forest Service isn't going to try to appeal that litigation. So that means we are done. We don't have to worry about fighting that anymore. That huge timber sale and the Tongass is not going to happen.
Great.
So, just a little, couple anecdotes on how important litigation is. And again, well, I guess I'm interspersing what it means to have a new administration versus this administration. If we don't have a change in administration, litigation is going to be an incredible tool. You've probably seen it all over the country, that the way that they're going about doing so many of these processes is so terrible that they're losing in court in all over the place. And so it's good that we have that as our incredibly important backstop. Any questions about the Tongass before we move on?
There is one question that's talking about if a sale did happen, the logged wood would wind up in China. Is that accurate? I believe it would.
Yeah, there is whole log export to China allowed. So, yep. And actually, one of the things that can happen in if we still have to face Trump is a lot of focus on corporate campaigning. And there's been conversations about whether we can do that in the Tongass for some of these places where these logs get shipped.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And that would be it for that one.
And then the rest is pretty quick. A National Petroleum Reserve, we also are awaiting decisions there. It is kind of interesting to see how many of these decisions, especially in the Arctic, the administration is just holding on to right now. There's the big decision for a management plan, in the if folks remember, under the Obama administration, they did a management plan for the entirety of the reserve that was called the Integrated Activity Plan. And the Trump administration had said from the time that they got into office that they wanted to update that Integrated Activity Plan they really want to get more acreage open around Tashekpuk Lake. ConocoPhillips has been very aggressive in pursuing development in the National Petroleum Reserve. And so it took them all the way. Here we are, close to the end of their first term, and they're still not done updating that plan. But it's just the record of decision at this point that we're waiting for. And so unfortunately that could come out at any minute. And it's something that we're definitely going to have to turn to if there is a transition in administration to try to do to immediately overturn. And then at the same time, there's a major development plan called the Willow Development Plan. I'm not sure that's the total exact technical name of it, but and that's one of the biggest development proposals that are currently existing in the NPRA, and it would be like a new development proposal. And so we've engaged in that EIS process. Many of the indigenous communities that live near the reserve are opposed to that. And we're also waiting for a record of decision for that project. And so those are things that we will definitely want to see immediate action on, stopping activity on, if there is a transition in administration. And then a couple just points at the end. I just like to go back to how important litigation is for so many of our issues. Two other issues that, just in case you didn't know about or haven't heard about in a while, the Arctic Ocean. You might not have heard about it in a while because nothing active has been happening. If you recall that under the Obama administration, he withdrew 125 million acres of the Arctic Ocean from oil and gas development, very close to before he left office. This is obviously an incredible victory for us who had been fighting off Shell and Arctic Ocean drilling for the entirety of the Obama administration. When President Trump came in, he fairly quickly lifted that executive order. We don't believe that he had the authority to lift that executive order, and it immediately went to court, and it's been in court ever since. So I think we feel very strongly that litigation, that we have very strong standing in that litigation, and a very strong case in that litigation. It's been argued in front of we won at the Alaska, that's an important point. We won the Alaska district level, which is huge. The government appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, and so oral arguments has been done, and we're just awaiting a decision in that case. And so that's another situation where nothing has happened in the Arctic Ocean during the Trump administration because of that litigation. So it's really held off development. And then Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge, for those that follow it, this is also another decades-long fight in which they've wanted to put a road through the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge. In the Obama administration, Secretary Jewell did an exhaustive study and determined that it was not in the public interest to do the road. The Trump administration came in and just basically put out a plan that said that they were going to go ahead with the road, and they didn't really do anything to address this very comprehensive study that the Obama administration had done to sort of show that the road wasn't in the public interest. So basically, the Trump administration, DOI, lost in court. Then they put together another plan in which they just wrote a bunch of reasons why they thought that it was justified without putting a lot of long-term study into it. And they resubmitted the plan for the road, and then they lost in court again. And so that one is also one that they're not going to appeal that decision. That one is just done. The administration's poor efforts towards planning and just inability to really comprehensively put the right efforts into these development plans that they have held them off, and now Eisenbeck is safe for now because of that litigation.
Excellent.
And so, this last slide, I was thinking about it. This is kind of a depressing last slide. I apologize. I didn't put a positive one at the end, but the reason why I put this at the end is, I've talked a little bit about the scenarios that can happen for each issue after the election. If we have a Trump administration again, a lot of the plans that we have in place, we just have to dig down, and it's going to be a marathon to continue those plans. A lot of them, especially in the Arctic Refuge, I talked a little bit about it in the Tongass, are going to be less administration focused and more corporate focused. I think the shift in conventional thinking about climate change and the importance of climate change and the importance of us addressing climate change, there's been just a drastic shift, even in the Trump administration, an administration that chooses to deny that climate change exists and refuses to take action on it. But companies are seeing that we need to address climate change, and banks are seeing that we need to address climate change. And so that's the world in which we're going to do advocacy if we see another Trump administration. If we see a Biden administration, we have heard from the Biden campaign, he is incredibly committed to taking very quick action to fight the climate and biodiversity crisis. And Alaska is an incredibly important story in the climate crisis. The headlines you see here just show how disproportionately affected Alaska is by climate change. The slide that I probably should have put at the end is how important Alaska will be to solving climate change, right? Many groups are focused on a goal of protecting 30% of our country by 2030 as a means of addressing the climate crisis from a public lands perspective. Alaska is going to be incredibly important in that fight. There's still landscape level protections that can happen in Alaska. Alaska stores 62% of the carbon in the entire United States. The Tongass has 8% of the carbon stored from national forests in the country. And so there's just an incredible climate story that Alaska has to tell, from the Arctic and the emissions that we can avoid by stopping all of that development, both in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and in the National Petroleum Reserve, and then the climate that we can keep stored in the Tongass National Forest and other areas. And so that's going to be a real focus for the Biden administration, if there is one. It's going to be a focus for us to make sure Alaska is elevated in that. And so there's a lot of hope and a lot of opportunity for us in that knock on wood eventuality of a different administration.
Right around the corner, hopefully. Yes. Yeah, well, thank you, Kristen. There is one question in the chat that asks about Ambler Road. Are we working that issue very much? It's the 212-mile Ambler mining road through gates of the Arctic National Park.
Yeah, I can't, we haven't been working that closely on it, and I probably can't answer the question on it. I'll try to look it up real quick as we're talking. What is there a specific question about it?
Where does it stand? State of Alaska has diverted 35 million in COVID relief to this road. Where does it stand? I believe we would have to look that up to get a good answer back to you. That was from Lester. And maybe our Alaska office is following it much closer. Andy from Anchorage might have better information on that, and I can try to look that up and get it out to the list. But yeah, thanks. With that, I think we'll pass over to Ariel. And Kristen, if you can, I don't know if you can not share your screen.
Okay, hold on. Give me a second to figure that out. There it is.
Great. All right, so hi, I'm Ariel Baker, the annual giving manager here at the League. I know that I've spoken to many of you over email and even met a few of you in person. So hello from DC. And I am one of the members of the development team. So after Kristen's really compelling explanation of our current fights in the courts, I just wanted to share one additional way that you can get involved and push for protections for wild Alaska, and that is to help us bring new folks to the cause. So Alaska Wilderness League members, like many of you who are here on and joining us today, have contributed resources to our fights. This allows us to amplify our message across the country, pursue aggressive litigation tactics, and work with champions in the halls of Congress to fight for Arctic protections. So without you and without our members, our organization simply couldn't exist. So today, we're hoping that you can help us build this base by inviting someone that you know to get involved and become a member. This could be a friend or a family member, a neighbor, or just really anyone that you think would care about saving our last great wild places. So in Lois's newsletter that's coming out early next week, we will be including sample email language that you can use to encourage a friend to join us and fight for protections for wild Alaska. So I hope that you'll keep an eye out and send an email or two. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, that would be wonderful to build the base and continue the momentum to protect these special places. So I appreciate any help that anybody can do in that area. I guess we will now open up to further questions or any conversation. I mean, I guess we have a few more minutes before the hour is up, so we certainly can take any questions about any of the issues Kristen talked about, or Ariel, or any other questions you might have for help I can bring to you guys from working with the field outreach work. I guess I'll just flag, we do have a grassroots toolkit that's on our website that you can go to for updates, information, tools to help. And there is one that's called Build the Base that I would appreciate if you had a chance to go look at as you're getting ready to send these emails. It also has a lot of videos you can send to people, links for, and they can kind of learn about this place just through online or virtual means. But there is one question here that did not get answered as we were talking. So it's, can foreign countries bid on the leases? And I don't know that one.
I'm not sure I know the answer. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to. But I can't think that I've ever been asked that question and I can say 100% with certainty, but I can't think of any reason why they wouldn't be able to. But we can get back on that.
Yeah, thanks. Does anybody have further questions? Well, thank you, everyone.
Oh, it looks like there's one more question.
Oh, okay. Closed.
You know, I don't know whether Pebble Mine's going to get a new CEO and keep trying. I think obviously they're at an incredible disadvantage, even if the Trump administration stays. And if the Biden administration comes in, you have to imagine that any investors they're trying to pursue are going to know that the Biden administration is going to put a hold on it for 4 years. So it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to go forward. I don't know a lot about like their financial situation and whether they could withstand waiting it out for 4 years. But they're definitely in a very precarious situation, especially if there's a transition administration.
And I do see the question about any of our webinars, the Geography of Hope webinars. I'm so glad that they've been so inspiring for people. We will be doing more of those. I don't know, we're working with one speaker right now to see if there's something we can schedule before the end of the year. So there may be one more of those before the end of the year. We also will be planning, of course, follow up, probably phone calls to talk about what happened in the elections. So there'll probably be one more call that we will do to kind of have a debrief on where things will stand after we finally know the results of the elections. But mostly the Geography of Hope will kick off again after the first of the year. So please do watch for those wonderful programs. There is a place on our website where you can find all the recorded programs for the ones that have already happened. There's 11 of them we've done this year. So there's a lot, and it's a good chance you may not have seen them all. So you can certainly go view those. You know what would be really cool is you pull together virtual gatherings of your friends and family and share your screen and view them together. So that's another tool that you can use. And let's see, does AWL have any corporate support from the tourism industry like the cruise lines?
There are a number of smaller businesses in Southeast Alaska that join in the campaign, or especially more sustainable based tourism. The cruise industry, we've had small cruise companies have been part of the campaign, but bigger cruise companies like Princess, it's definitely been a target throughout different aspects of the campaign, but it's been a little bit more difficult. And I don't think we've ever gotten a major cruise line to take a position against logging in the Tongass. But there definitely are a lot of smaller businesses, especially tourism focused businesses, that are a part of the campaign.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to see the faces that I see. And you guys continue to help us. That would be fantastic. We'll keep these places protected.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
You all.